So my topic today is goddess as a social construct, the worshippers of Atargatis in the Mediterranean from the 4th century BC to the 4th century CE. In the year 1928, the surrealist Belgian painter René Magritte painted these pictures you see and entitled it Le Faux Miroir, the false mirror. It represented an oversized eye where instead of iris, the viewer sees beautiful blue sky with white clouds. The eye is like a window giving the real view and not only reflection to it. The former owner of this painting, the photographer Man Ray, said about it, "sees as much as itself is seen." It sums up the essence of the painting, putting the viewer on the spot, being in the same time observer by the surreal eye. It corresponds well with the sphere of studying ancient religions. The ritual agent sees as much in a deity as it is available to him or her through his or her socio-cultural implications and the professional intermediation. He or she represents the worshipped deity with all means of his or her own culture, trends, and traditions. This metaphor on the perception of the world through a certain window, which is through the human eye, is basis for the project Al-At, People of the Gods, focused on the worshippers of the two major goddesses of the classical Near East, Allat and Atargatis. It puts on focus the perspective of the worshippers, their cultic professions and social roles on the cult and representation of the goddesses. This talk today will concentrate only on one of these two female deities, on Atargatis, who was worshipped in the vast territory of the Near East, from northern Syria to Arabia, from Levantine coast to the banks of Euphrates, and beyond, in the distant parts of the ancient world like Dacia, Scythia, Macedonia, Egypt, Britain, etc. I will, however, concentrate today mostly on the evidence from the Near East, Egypt, and Delos. I will only signal the Macedonian evidence very shortly. I will show you only one inscription from there. We will follow from place to place, tracing the people mentioned in the inscriptions who were connected to Atargatis, as well as associated gods, trying to understand the basic problem. Who were the people who worshipped this goddess? We will try to understand the role of women in this particular cult. Furthermore, we will look at the people in space in the sanctuaries and beyond of the walls of the temples. In the scope of the social approach to the religious system, I will provide an introduction to how to draw a portrait of the people engaged in the cult of Atargatis, visible in the written sources. The talk presents an initial draft of my ongoing project. A bit theory. Understanding the deities as social construct is based on the work of Peter Berger, The Social Reality of Religion, published in 1970. He has extended his concepts from the social construction of reality, where he stated the construction of everyday life by social units, from language to institutions, to order life within the time and space. The key to understand daily life is for Berger the language, the vehicle of symbols, meanings, concepts of the surrounding world. It is a facilitator of the social interactions. The theories of Berger are grounded on the theories of the father of sociology of religion, so Emile Durkheim, who noticed in the elementary forms of the religious life that the religions are social constructs and based on the perception of the societies in the thought that the men create their own gods. Peter Berger bases his observations also on the historic dimension of his social aspects of different religious systems, juxtaposing monotheistic and polytheistic systems, descending also to the ancient religious practices. Furthermore, he argues that man not only produces a world, but he also produces himself in the world he lives. By constructing his own world, he constructs culture, a new living space, which differs from the biological one. Berger writes, man produces tools of every conceivable kind, by means of which he modifies his physical environment and bends nature to his will. Man also produces language, and on its foundation, and by means of it, a towering edifice of symbols that permeate every aspect of his life. There is good reason for thinking that the production of non-material culture has always gone hand in hand with man's activity of physically modifying his environment. In his opinion, the society provides the world where an individual lives and is giving perpetually the meanings to this living space, maintaining the memory of the traditions, adapting to the changes and new situations. To order the world, legitimize the place of the human in it, and to compete the dangerous chaos, there is religion, with rituals and deities. Religions have a collective character. They depend on the social aspects, showing individual features for each community. The inhabitants of at least the Near Eastern cities, but I think that it can be developed also on the other corners of the ancient world, worship not only the same divine constellations. They can and they do share certain religious patterns as well as gods, but they always apply on perception. This approach throws the light on understanding the processes of shaping of the deities of the same names by different societies and cultures in contact, looking on the different communities. The cult of Atargatis, diffused in distant places from Syrian Hierapolis, Manbij, represents the social interactions of people of different backgrounds belonging to various spectrum of the non-material culture, looking at the religions and practices as social constructs, lies also in the approach presented recently by the project Lived Ancient Religions of Jörg Rübke from Erfurt, which focuses foremost on the place of the individual as a religious agent and representative of the society. Furthermore, it showed how much it is necessary to look closely on the people and the ritual practices and not only on the deities per se. This research made basis for the reconstruction of the religious life and study of the cultural interactions. It looks from the first glance that exactly these interactions model the worship and, in the end, the perception of the deities. And in this theoretical framework, I would like to present you my project and my topic. In Syria, there is a city not far from the river Euphrates. It is called Holy and is sacred to the Assyrian Hera. This name, I think, does not go back to the city's founding, but of old there was another one. And it was later, when the rites became great, that the name changed to what it is today. Such words open the famous Dea Syria of Lucian. I neither intend here to dive into the analysis of the passages of Lucian, nor want to discuss his person and his authenticity and the way he speaks about the cult of Atargatis. The Lucian's work will serve only as a reference to the epigraphical material concerning mostly the cultic agents and temple profession. Lucian specifies the locations of the temple of Atargatis. It is situated in the city called Hierapolis, holy city in the vicinity of Euphrates in Syria. And here it is with the blue dot marked on the map. By the way, all the maps which I will present whether come from my own database, which I construct in the NodeGoat, or they come from the pleiadsstoa.org. He is right to point that the name was given later and the place itself was known by a different geoname. The Aramaic sources provide the same name with this place, which this place bears nowadays, Manbok, Manbij. The importance of this place in the antiquity results also in the popularity of anthroponyms composed with the name of the city. Jane Lightfoot, whose work on the Dea Syria is inestimable, gathered the personal names transcribed in Greek, which comprise the toponymic element. One of the people, bearing the name Manbogaios, is attested in a funerary inscription from Palmyra, dating on 27 years CE. He was a soldier of the first cohors Damascenorum Sagittaria, which means that he was an archer. According to Lightfoot, these names are attested in Syria and in Commagene. It shows the importance of the place on the social, cultural, and religious map of the population of these two provinces. When it concerns the cult of Atargatis in her main cultic center in Hierapolis, Manbij, we only dispose with 2 inscriptions from the surroundings of the sanctuary, which relate to the sphere of religious practices. All of them are in Greek. They are dated on the Roman period. The text of the dedication, which you see on your screens, is particularly interesting from the social point of view. It reads, Barsameos, chief of the clan, and Rameilos, the priest, and the clan of the tribe of Topesidians, in accomplishing the vow. First of all, the names of these 2 men are Aramaic. The first one, Barsameos, which is not different from Hatrian or Adesin, Barsamia, is a popular in the region. It is theophoric, based on the divine name Samia, meaning the son of Samia. This name Barsamia means the son of Samia. And the second, Rameilos, was probably Ramaila in Aramaic or Ramailu, loving the god. Barsamia is described as archifrator, the chief of the clan, most probably of the Topeisidia itself, or, if we can read it different, a chief of a brotherhood. Rameilos is the priest, Hiereus. The inscription does not state the name of the deity he serves, but it can be that this text was offered to Atargatis. This text comes from probably the 1st century BCE, according to the paleographical criteria. From the same time, so from the late 1st century, comes another attestation, this time linked with the visual representation. A relief depicting a priest wearing a conical hat with ribbons, proceeding the ritual of burning aromatics on the brazier, states his name, Aleksandra, and the profession, great priest. However, it does not state explicitly if he was the priest of Hadad, who was worshipped as the divine spouse of Atargatis in Hierapolis, or he was a priest of Atargatis. Most probably, the office was switchable in a way that one who was the priest of Hadad could be also elected a priest of Atargatis, and vice versa. The poor number of the epigraphic material from Hierapolis, the vital and essential cultic center of ancient Syria, results from the not excavated site of the sanctuary, which can bring more evidence in the future, hopefully. The fame and importance of the Hierapolitan sanctuary arrived also to the kingdom of Nabatea, where in the Wadi Siyak, leading to the city of Petra, was carved an idol, rectangular representation with stylized eyes, as you see on the slide, with the inscription in the Nabatean script, Atarata Manbogeita, Atargatis from Manbog. This inscription does not attest any person, any dedicator, any professional. It's just a statement. We can assume that either it was a Nabatean who had an individual experience of the goddess from Manbog, or a Hierapolitan who set an inscription and an image according to the local tradition. From Hierapolis comes also the earliest Aramaic attestations of the name of the goddess. The name Atarata, the Aramaic name Atarata, appears on the locally minted coins from the Hellenistic period onwards. According to the study of Nate Andrade, there was no similar reference in the Achaemenid coinage from this place. One type of the coins associates the goddess named Atarata, or Ate, in the connection to Alexander the Great, minted after the Battle of Issos. Furthermore, some other coins, which you see on the slide, mention the priest of Hadad, called Abd Hadad, so the servant of Hadad, in the connection to the goddess. This, according to Andrade, was a sign of a change in minting from a local Achaemenid satraps to the priest of Hadad, Atargatis. From the late 4th century BC, we observe the increasing role of the priests in the issuing of the coins. These coins show the priest in their moment of ritual of burning aromatics and prayer following the Syrian pattern. The coins of Abd Hadad show the importance of the priest's family in the early Hellenistic times. In the Roman times, these are the citizens of Hierapolis who mint the coins with the images of Zeus Hadad and Hera Atargatis. Already in the mid-3rd century BCE, a sanctuary of Atargatis named also Soteira is also attested in Macedonian Beroia. A priest named Apollonides dedicated Atargatis, who is labeled savior, on a stone block. He explicitly names the goddess by her original name, Atargatis, and not in the descriptive manner of identification to a Greek deity or to calling her just Dea Syria or Dea Syria. Furthermore, the temple of Atargatis and the presence of the goddess in the Macedonian Beroia, as well as other cities of Hellenistic Macedonia, for example, in Pella and Edessa, was important place of manumission, which means freeing the slaves. The inscriptions, dated both on the Hellenistic and Roman times, attest this place with the female slaves and female masters. Staying with the Hellenistic evidence of people of the goddess, a papyrus from Fayum from 222 BC provides an information of a shrine to the Syrian goddess, worshipped together with the reigning queen Berenike, identified here with Aphrodite, in a house of a Macedonian soldier named Mahatas and his wife Asia. She was probably of northern Syrian origins and introduced the cult in her family to her husband and to her kids. Her children, Apollonius and Mahatas, known from this particular inscription, dated on 106-182 BC, were the priests of Zeus Soter and the Syrian goddess, as well as the associated gods of in the temple. In the papyrus and in the inscription, there is no name of Atargatis, but an epithet Syrian goddess, Syria Thea. I attempt to introduce the theory that Asia could have been a member of a family of priests of Atargatis, especially that her sons became then the priests of the goddess. Maybe even she was involved somehow in the ritual agency, despite we do not have any evidence for this. I fully agree with Nate Andrade that this denomination, Syria Thea, was a description of the deity to the local Greek and Egyptian community in Pelusium, where the house of Mahatas and Asia was standing, and which is mentioned in the papyrus I showed before. Furthermore, it is a sign of cultures in contact of Syrian and non-Syrian populations. Similar phenomenon, it is to be observed in Delos, where was a strong community of Syrians who founded a temple of Atargatis and Hadad in the 2nd century BC. The inscription, dated on 166 BC, states that a couple, Nikon, the male name, and his wife, Onesako, were the priests of Hagnetea. Furthermore, this inscription mentions a cultic association, Thiazos, of Syrians involved in the cult as holding the celebrations on the 20th day, Ekaidistai, gathered by the goddess. The goddess acts as the founder and leader of the community. Thus, she was the divine reference of the part of the Delian society. This island provides a good documentation of the context of worship of the goddess in the Hellenistic period. The sign of a vivid contact between the communities of Syrians and non-Syrians, like, for example, Athenians, etc., are about 20 Greek inscriptions, where 15 contain the name of Atargatis, and 5 are with just Dea Syria, sometimes interpreted as Athena Aphrodite. They cover the time of almost 200 years. There were an evolution of the sanctuary's administration, from the Hierapolitans, who founded the temple, to the Athenians and Romans. Between 127 and 117, there were people of Hierapolis who professed the priestly functions, and they intermediated the culturally mixed community of the worshippers. It is interesting that in 128 BC, the city polis of Hierapolis was involved in the rededication, maybe a restoration or remanagement of the temple of the Syrian gods in Delos. From the second half of the 2nd century BC, the worshippers started to use in the inscriptions the denomination Syrian goddess, with the association to Aphrodite and to Athena, and the mention of Hierapolitans as the cultic operators is slowly disappearing from the epigraphic evidence in the favor for Athenian cultic operators, who took over the administration and organization of the cult of Atargatis on Delos. The Hierapolitans must have introduced the Athenians for the cultic services, who governed the island for the priesthood. We cannot even exclude that through the marriages between Syrians and Athenians of Delos, the ties within the cultic professions became stronger, although the sources are silent about that fact. The priests were appointed for an annual cadency, what is typical procedure in many temple administrations observed in the Near East, also from really deep antiquity. A case of a man called Cleostratides, whom you see here in this inscription, son of Apollonius, is a very interesting case. Around 117 BC, he offered a thanksgiving offering to Hadad and Atargatis under the Hierapolitan priest Marinos, while the same person in 108 BC, on behalf of Romans, Athenians, and Therapeutai, gave throne to Atargatis, called already Hagne Aphrodite. The cultic group of Therapeutai, the cultic servants, worshippers, is attested in the inscriptions from Delos concerning only the cult of the goddess. The large majority of Therapeutai were non-Athenians, coming from places such as Antioch, Laodicea, Hierapolis, Rome, Alexandria, Ascalon, Seleucia, Ephesus, and Damascus. The Athenians changed also the name. From around 112 BCE, the Delian Atargatis became additionally Hagne Aphrodite. The involvement of the Athenians in the cult of Atargatis on Delos was also far beyond fulfilling the administrative duties. In the period between 112 and mid-1st century BC, are attested in the epigraphic material many donations and extensions of the temple of the goddess, which you see here on the slide. Here is the sanctuary of the Atargatis, and here is the bigger version of the plan of it. They were adding this theatron in this period, dedicating furniture, throne, porticos, etc. It looks like the Athenians acquired the new deities, especially Atargatis, as their own. The names of agents from the Hierapolitan administration period are Greek, although they can be just simple translations of the Aramaic names. We find there people called Zenobios, Apollonius, Marinos. The same names appear also in the Aramaic sources. This is sign of integration of the Syrian expats in the new socio-cultural environment. Except on Esako, there are no other mentions of women involved in the priestesshood. All the names with the reference to the profession hiereus, so priest, are masculine. The presence of Syrians on Delos is explained by the economic purposes, and they constituted one of the strong non-Greek expatriated groups together with Egyptians and Phoenicians. I am aware that I did not touch any further Greek evidence, and even the Delian evidence was briefly summarized by me. But from the limits of the time for this webinar, I would like to pass now to the attestations from the Roman, Parthian times, from the Mesopotamia, Syria, and Levant. A good record of the worshippers and the worship comes from Dura Europos on Euphrates. Here is the dot showing where Dura Europos is. Where a sanctuary dedicated to Atargatis was located. The inscription, which you see beside, is a foundation text of a part of the sanctuary, either an adjacent building for gatherings, the theatron probably, or a chapel in the temple. It is difficult to interpret the term topos used in the inscription. Of the goddess on 20th of the month Gorpiaios, which falls on our August-September, the year 37 CE. Macedonian Gorpiaios corresponds to Aramaic Elul. In Dura Europos, we have attestation of both calendars. So we have the names according to the Macedonian calendar and Aramaic names of the months. In the Mesopotamian calendars, it was the month of the celebrations for the goddess Ishtar. There is a link, despite of a huge gap, a chronological gap, between this inscription, which you see now on your screen, and the text mentioned before coming from Delos, revealing a cult group holding a celebration on 20th day. That must have been an official festival, deeply rooted in the tradition and practiced also about 200 years later in a completely different place, which is Dura Europos. The inscription is in Greek, and it is an attestation with signatures of involved people, the members of Hetaireia, the cultic association counting between 12 and 15 people. It could be that the Delian Thiases of the Syrians and Durian Hetaireia had very similar cultic functions. All the members are undersigned, what the text also states. This all names salad, how I would call it, below. These are all the undersigned people who took part in building this meeting room. The Hetaireia presided by its chief called Archi-Hetaireios. It is interesting that a similar inscription and cultic association dated on the same day and month, but 17 years later, was attached also to the temple of Aflat, a deity originated from the island of Anna. Furthermore, these inscriptions show a strong tie. The Archi-Hetairos Rahimnaios from this text is the father of two priests known from the temple of Aflat, known from this text, which was made 17 years later from this one. However, the duties and activities of the association stay for now unknown. Named Adrade states with large probability that the Greek term of Hetaireia is only a description of the local organization, probably a dining association. Ted Kaiser, however, explains the term Hetaireia as brotherhood and combines it also with banqueting. All the names which you see are Greek transcription of the Aramaic local names. The epigraphy of Dura attests also in the involvement and existence of eunuchs in the sphere of cults. Otes, the one depicted on the fresco sacrificing in front of the Palmyrene deities in the Temple of Bel, formerly known as Temple of Palmyrene Gods, was one of them, despite Lucinda Dirven dismissed the theory of the cultic function of Otes from the lack of sources. The theory of Rostovtsev, who claimed that Otes might have been a eunuch belonging to a temple, looks believable that Otes might have fulfilled some cultic functions, especially that we can assume that this personal name is based on the element Ateh, and not on the Persian etymology postulated by Cumont and Texidor. And Ateh is one of the components of the name of Atargatis. The name from Dura Europe, the text from Dura Europos attests also the practice of offering phalloi for the goddess Atargatis, which mirrored the Lucian description of similar practice in Hierapolis, who stated the existence of the court on the court of the temple of phalloi. The most interesting, however, structure and source for the names and gender of worshippers of Atargatis is Theatron, this place, exactly this small chamber, which is called in the historiography as Salle à Gradins, the name coined by Franz Cumont, who was excavator of this place. And it's one of three similar structures in Dura Europos attached to the temples of female deities, Artemis and Zanatkona, beside Atargatis. According to the study of Sanne Klaver on the women in Dura, Palmyra, and Seleucia, there are 29 inscriptions from the temple of Atargatis, where 20 are placed on the steps, 5 on the pedestals destined to some sacrifice, 2 opposite the entrance to the naos, and 2 on the left staircase. 2 inscriptions are dedications of the cits to their wives, to the wives of the donors. These inscriptions are dated on 61 CE, so about 30 years after building the temple. These inscriptions are neither dedicatory nor honorific, in my opinion, even if they are too elaborated, giving the affiliation of the women who present themselves as daughters and wives, or statements of dedication of the seats to their wives of daughters or daughters. They are labels of the seats, giving the final results of a list. It's just an extended list. The room could place about 120 to 130 people. The names are much fewer, and it is possible that not everyone was inscribed. Maybe those seats were free and accessible to others, while the ones with the inscriptions belong to the person indicated in the label and to her family. The building with its seats definitely served for cultic issues and ritual gatherings. The boom of the inscribing names in 61 and 62, what you see on this graphics, within the structure should not be seen as one-time use only of the places. Among these texts are also ones without dates. It is possible that through certain trends and references into the phenomena in the society of Dura Europos, the women and their families wanted to have their place granted for a long time, if not forever, in the activities of the worship of Atargatis. The inscription of the name buying seats as a warranty of taking active part in the rituals by the agents and their families after their death. None of the women has a notice of her profession. None of them is labeled as priestess or musician or whoever else. There are thus no indications about the priestesshood in Dura. However, the cultic personnel in the temple of Atargatis, as well as of other goddesses in Dura, must have been mixed. Lucian mentions the involvement of women as musicians, confirmed also by a statue of a woman with a drum from Hatra, being a wife of the male priest of Atargatis. The theory of existence of female or gender-mixed cultic associations who gather in the structures is likely, even if we do not have direct evidence for this. Making music, singing hymns, and dining are possible to envision as cultic practices with the salle à gradins. Among these women, we see the members of the prominent families, like the one of Seleukos, son of Lysias, the governor of the city. The famous family of Conon is represented at the seats of the salle à gradins of Atargatis. This family is also represented in the Temple of Bel by the famous fresco from Dura Europos. His daughters-in-law, Bitnanaya and Rumaya, were the owners of the seat. They were married to the two sons of Conon, Nicostratos and Patroclus, represented on the famous painting. Also from this theatron, we learned that certain families, like the one of Seleukos, the governor of the city, practiced endogamy. The owners of the seats were mostly women with Greek and Aramaic names according to the epigraphic evidence placed on the steps. 11 women have Greco-Macedonian names, 6 Semitic, and 2 are incomplete, to judge which names they have. The popularity of the Greco-Macedonian names, both at men and women, indicates the strong connection to the traditions of the city and the Macedonian settlement in the Hellenistic times. It can indicate the continuity of certain traditions within the families. In my opinion, seeing the Greek names as the warranty of prestige and success is very stereotypical and presents quite a colonial point of view. Some of the Greek names can be simply a paraphrase of the Semitic equivalents, like, for example, Athenodoros is an equivalent of Wahballat in Aramaic or in Arabic. The worship of Atargatis is also attested in Palmyra. Inscription which you see on the slide, and another one mention the existence of the temple of Atargatis as one of 4 cultic centers, beside the sacred garden, temple of Arsu, and temple of Allat. It is interesting that the great sanctuary of Bel does not appear here. According to this text, it was a place of display of honorific statues, especially the ones of the people who took part in the caravan expedition. The inscription 127, so this one which you see from 144 CE, mentions the members of the caravan which went to Vologazias, and it precises the location of the inscription. According to the text, it had to be placed beside of the 10 years earlier text of the famous caravan leader Shoaddu, who went with the Palmyrines to Haracene. However, this temple, similar to the one in Hierapolis, was never discovered. Another text from Palmyra, from the year 140 CE, is more related to the sphere of cult. It is as well honorific, but it states the fulfillment of the promise after the death of a person. It is a decision of setting up a statue of a certain Ahophale from the same family as Hiram Bonne, known from 3 other texts from Palmyra, who was symposiarchos of the god Bel. Ahophale, before his death, promised to Malak Bel, god Taimai, and Atargatis the offerings of some unspecified sort in the eternal possession by the gods, animal burning sacrifice, makluta or holocaust, and the consecrated lambs. The reference to the burning offering and to the eternal objects can be found as well in the Lucian, the Dea Syria. The goddess, as well as the other gods, are called in Greek the ancestral deities, and in Aramaic the good gods. The latter designation is not common in the honorific texts. It's rather used in votive dedications. It is possible that Ahophale died suddenly before making his own dedication, and the honorific statue made by the council, the city council of Palmyrines, the Boule, is a partial fulfillment of the vow of the deceased one. Atargatis in Palmyra and in Dura, as Andrade rightly noticed in his recent paper, are never called Dea Syria, even if the Durin society presents a good cultural mix. We do not know anything about the priests of Atargatis in Palmyra or about the features of the cult in this particular place, but the epigraphy of Hatra attests a ritual operator serving for the goddess. The inscription, H5, is a dedication of a statue of Samia, a wife of Oga, the priest of Atargatis. She is represented, unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of it. You just need to believe my words. She holds a drum which can relate to her profession as a cultic musician of the goddess. Lucian states in the Dea Syria that the women perform music and dance in the temple of Atargatis. 2 other texts from Hatra mention the goddess in the curse inscriptions for justice against the killers of 2 women. And the mention of Atargatis appears only with the female name. With the curses about men, she doesn't appear. She is not mentioned. Here, we do not know about any involvement of these women or their husbands in the cultic professions. We don't know any more about their priesthood. Furthermore, the temple of Atargatis was not in the main Great Temenos, like the temple of Allat or Martan, but it was one of the small shrines located within the city. When it concerns Edessa and Haran, placed here, the old Syriac inscriptions provide the theophoric names with the component Atech, Abdat, Abdata, Barates, Barata, Mata, Salmata, etc., used in the inscriptions from Edessa and in Haran. However, epigraphic sources are silent about organized worship and cultic personnel of Atargatis in Edessa. What we know about Atargatis in this place comes from the passages of Christian Syriac writers, like the author of Doctrine of Addai. These sources, which are from 4th century CE onwards, inform us about, for example, self-castration of the priests of Atargatis in Edessa, and this practice was officially forbidden in the 4th century CE. Until now, I presented you the evidence which points on the people of the East bearing often Aramaic names or translated Aramaic names, and their influence on the spread of the cult. The cult of the Syrian goddess was also attractive to the Roman soldiers stationing in the nowadays Lebanon. Atargatis, Dea Syria, appears in 2 bilinguals, one from Beirut and one from Bekaa Valley, from Niha. And Niha is placed exactly here. The second one is a dedication by a veteran, Sextus Alius Iulius, from Italia, so he was Italiker, for the Virgin Ochmaia of the goddess Atargatis. In Greek, Dea Syria. In Greek, she's called Atargatis, and in Latin she's called Dea Syria. Showing this monument, this inscription was placed on a monument which showed a woman in veil. He attested also in his text the worship of the goddess in the city of Nicha, giving the topographic epithet to the Dea Syria. The text from Beirut attests that the goddess was worshipped as the divine patron by the soldiers of the Statio Geranensis, which is attributed to the vicinities of Aqaba. The dedicatory activity of Roman soldiers for the goddess Atargatis are also attested in Sia, in the Hauran, and in Dura Europos. This preliminary survey, through the chosen written sources related to the goddess Atargatis and her worshippers, shows the big impact of the families and their traditions. It should not surprise when we look at the cultures of the Near East in the diachronic approach, taking into consideration the pre-Hellenistic traditions and the engagement of particular families in the issue of cultic practices. Even though we do not have enough material for cultic personnel of the goddess in different places, we see through the scraps how much the spread of the cult was induced by people coming from province Syria from the Hellenistic times. For sure, the community of Syrian expats, so people from Hierapolis, Antiochia, from northern parts of Syria, was bigger than the sources tell us about, but what is visible in the context of the early texts concerning the worshippers of Atargatis and their involvement in the construction of the places of worship, it indicates the connections to the families or clans who were engaged in the organization of the cult in their homeland, Hierapolis, Manbok, or vicinities. I do not speak about the dedications, because they all show individual aspect of worship. The Delian case shows indirectly the training of the new cultic personnel of completely new cultural backgrounds and transfer of the cult from one social group to another. The case of Dura Europos pointed out the engagement of women in the cultic practices. It is possible to envision that the cultic professionals of Atargatis were of mixed gender, inclusive eunuchs who had a particular place in the organization of the rituals. Through the inscription from Bekaa Valley, as well as from Lukian, we know that there were virgins serving to the goddess. The role of the women in the cult of the goddess is underestimated in the research. Even if they do not bear the title priestess, they were involved as cultic agents. They were virgins, like in the case of Nicha, and married women, like in Dura Europos. We cannot deny either the role of the army and the cultural interactions of the soldiers and veterans with the local societies. Their dedications to the local deities also show their willingness of integration and inclusion. The worship of Atargatis is the reflection of what happens in the societies in the period between the 4th century BCE and the 4th century CE. It presents well the context and interactions of Greek, Roman, and Aramaic cultures. For the Aramaic speakers, it was clear who was Atargatis and which occasions are good to invoke in her assistance. For the Greeks and Romans, it was not so clear, and the description of the goddess by the title Dea Syria or Dea Syria is the most uniform one. As Lukian states, as it results from the inscriptions, the goddess to her non-native worshippers seemed to be similar to Hera, to Aphrodite, to Artemis and Nemesis. The transcription of the Aramaic name Ataratech into Greek Atargatis is induced most probably by the Hierapolitans by facilitating the Greek community to pronounce the difficult Semitic word with the guttural oin. The indication Dea Syria also refers to the strong influence of Syrian societies on the ritual practices and worship. That answers the question set in the beginning of my talk. Who were the worshippers of Atargatis? They were Syrians and people with whom they met and had any interaction. It might also indicate the importance of the Syrian community abroad and their esteem as their ancestral cult was integrated and recognized in different places of the ancient world. Her cult is not a fusion of different Semitic goddesses, but the diffusion and maintenance of ancient ancestral traditions of Syrian people. To sum up the topic of Atargatis as a social construct, I want once more to refer to the words of Paul Berger. Be this as it may, society is, of course, nothing but part and parcel of non-material culture. Society is that aspect of the latter that structures man's ongoing relations with his fellow men. As an element of culture, society fully shares in the latter's character as a human product. Society is constituted and maintained by human beings. That's why we find such a complexity of the perceptions of the goddess, of one goddess by many cultures and people, not as a syncretistic religion, but as a construction of human beings of different cultural backgrounds. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Aleksandra, for your interesting talk. And it's really nice to see this kind of work being done on a micro scale, and also to have some dots in on a map. Always interesting about that, for sure. And I mean, first of all, I want to make sure that, give the words to people. If you have any question, please just raise your hand or use the chat. And meanwhile, we're waiting for some question, have some comments to start conversation, discussion. So I think it's very important to use this social construct. So we have this direct contact between the individual and the deity, but then within that, obviously, there are more gods, into this social construct into play. So how those do play, as well as other individuals, because we are looking at a place of worship, and we're not just direct, but there was other individuals taking part to this. And are you facing, and what do you think about that?
Yes, there's